It had been less than 20 minutes since the General Slocum left the 3rd Street Pier in Lower Manhattan. Running for their lives were baby Adela Liebenau and her mother, Reverend Haas and his flock, and Catherine Gallagher.
Don't forget there was over 1,000 people on that boat. All the women were screaming and crying. The flames were coming up, but it was moving bad.
The evolution of a panic follows a fairly predictable path. In crowd situations, a couple of people immediately lose their self-control. That behavior is noticed by the great majority of the crowd. People essentially make the decision that if I don't begin to act more aggressively, then I'm not going to get a life preserver, or I'm not going to get into a boat. And quickly, that panic reached what psychologists call the point of demoralization. Good, Christian, nonviolent, decent people begin to pummel each other for life preservers, bite each other for positions along the railing of the boat. The only real effort to fight the fire by the crew on the General Slocum took place within the first 5 minutes. And they ran to the scene of the fire and began to do what they had never done before, which was to actually pull down these old fire hoses, hook them up to the standpipes, and get a stream of water going.
Turn the valve on! Let's go!
They might have pulled it off anyway, but the fire hose was 13 years old, had never been used, and never been tested, so when they hook the hose up to the standpipe and let the free flow of water go through it, the hose is kinked in places and it simply explodes. It's essentially at that point every man for himself. One of the many details that conspired to make it such an incredible catastrophe was the fact that the captain was not notified till at least 7, perhaps as many as 10 minutes into the fire. So while all mayhem is breaking out, while the fire is going from a simple fire into an uncontrollable inferno, the captain is simply piloting the ship up the East River.
Conklin, is there a problem down there in the engine room?
There's full of fire up in the bow, Captain!
Many of the options that he might have had in terms of pulling the ship to one of the nearby shores were lost in those crucial minutes. People began to rush about the boat looking for ways to save themselves, and many people on the upper deck found lifeboats that were secured to the deck.
My Aunt Annie said she tried to pull the life raft off the ceiling and she broke her fingernails trying to get it off. It was stuck fast.
Somewhere along the line of the 13 years of the General Slocum's operation, someone had determined these lifeboats were more nuisance than anything else, and they had wired them in place so that they wouldn't rattle around. Nobody could get them free. And people pulled out pocket knives. They tried to tear them loose. None of them budged. They were permanently affixed to the ship.
Even without the lifeboats, the passengers should have had another option. The Slocum was stocked with life jackets. But on that day, nothing went as it should.
Of the 2,500 life jackets on board the boat, almost all of them are rotten. They've been purchased back in 1891, never checked and never replaced. The internal portion of those life preservers was at one point solid cork. Over 13 years of exposure, that cork had been reduced to just simply fine dust. People pulled down the life preservers and they disintegrated in their hands. Some people actually put them on and then jumped over the side and found, once they hit the water, that these life preservers were actually, as somebody put it later, life killers. They had the buoyancy of dirt, almost like hanging sacks of flour around your neck, and people sank like stones.
The story is that they put the life preservers on the children, threw them overboard, and they sank.
I guess it was just a half-baked operation.
Full speed astern! Astoria! Astoria!
Full speed astern, Captain! Aye!
The captain, he knows that he's got to make some pretty quick and decisive decisions. He's just leaving the Hellgate, a very treacherous stretch of water in the northern part of the East River. On a map, it looks very simple. You either go to the port and pull over to the Bronx shore, or to starboard and pull over to the Queens shore. But he knows that this water is full of riptides and cross currents.
No, change that! Change that! Full speed ahead! North rudder! Beach it! North rudder!
North rudder island, Captain! Aye!
So he decides, knowing the river as well as he does, to head for North Brother Island, a minute, perhaps 2 minutes distant, just off the Bronx shore, where he might beach the ship and allow the people to jump off in shallow water and save themselves. Mariners are told to point the ship away from the wind. He decides it's too perilous to do so, and that it's worth, at great cost, to race for North Brother Island. As he charges forward, oxygen feeds the flames, pushes them back to the stern part of the ship, which is where most people are. And so it has that perverse effect of, as the closer they got to safety, the worse the fire got, the more the people were imperiled.
The strangest part, everything was close by. I mean, you weren't out in the ocean or anything. You were right close by both Manhattan and the islands.
The Slocum was 264 feet in length. The East River at this point just 1,000 feet wide. With the fire growing in intensity, why didn't the captain just turn to the closest shore?
Why he didn't? My mother said that he probably didn't dock in a regular dock for fear of setting other boats on fire. My father felt that the captain should have docked the boat sometime sooner.
It's still debatable whether it was the right decision, but it was one that he stuck with. At one point he told the mate to pull into the Bronx shore, and then almost as quickly told him not to do so. And the ship rocked to the port side and dumped dozens of people overboard, and then rocked back when he ordered it to turn back to his objective of North Brother Island.
Today, jumping into the East River may not seem that threatening, but to most of the passengers on the Slocum that day, the waters of Hell Gate were a death sentence.
The immigrants did not swim, especially ladies.
Heavy shoes, thick clothing, dresses right down to people's ankles, men in full wool suits. Even a very able-bodied swimmer thrown into the East River that morning would have had a really difficult time staying afloat for very long.
When that deck collapsed, they all went down in the water, and that was it.
The idyllic church picnic had turned into Dante's Inferno. In a surrealistic mix of sunshine, smoke, and fire, the General Slocum's passengers had to choose between the roaring flames and the ripping currents of the East River. The 15th of June, 1904, 10:22 a.m. It had been a little more than half an hour since the General Slocum left the dock in Lower Manhattan. Now, it left a trail of bodies on a mad dash to North Brother Island, 5 minutes and a quarter of a mile ahead on the East River. Hundreds more would die during those 5 minutes.
I think that my mother was burned so badly on her left side is because she was hanging on to the railing of the boat. Probably had me in her right arm. Otherwise, I would assume that she'd be hanging on with both arms. She certainly saved my life, but the scars were always there, and they were terrible.
Even the people who knew how to swim faced great peril, because all around them are panic-stricken people in the process of drowning. An able-bodied person might be able to stay afloat for about 90 seconds, maybe 2 minutes, if they don't know how to swim, just from flailing in the water. And when you're in that manic phase of panic, if you see another human being, that person is as good as an island. Those who lived told stories of being grabbed from behind, having to pry themselves loose from people, and then not being able to save anybody because of fear of losing their own life and heading for shore. And so the East River is one of the busiest waterfronts in the world. Dozens and dozens of tugboats and lighters, barges, every imaginable boat is out there doing its daily business. When people see the Slocum race by, they drop what they're doing and head in its wake.
Soon, dozens of river craft were following the Slocum on its way to North Brother Island. A tugboat named the Wade was commandeered by 2 New York policemen, Tom Cooney and Tom Skelly. They braved the searing heat alongside the Slocum to rescue passengers from the burning decks.